Hey guys, welcome back to another Spy Family Sunday. I am here to talk about Spy Family Chapter 102, which I'm happy to report is the conclusion of this arc with Mr. Henderson and Martha. I love this chapter. I think it wrapped up everything in a very realistic way. It was beautiful. It had impact. It really gave us a chance to further understand these characters. And as always, Endo does excellent world building. So before we get into the chapter, if you are new here, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I do like talking about these chapters after I upload the video. So chapter 102 starts off with Martha. She's already left the train station. She's gone home to South Berlin. I'm assuming she's going home with her aunt and uncle. I'm not sure. Forgive me for not remembering who these characters are, but she makes it home. There's an emotional reunion. She's crying. They're eating dinner. They're helping Martha recuperate, and we flash to some time later. Martha is raring to go. She's wearing a cute outfit, and so her family's like, Martha, where are you going? And she's like, I'm going out. I'm going to school, and so she goes up to the school. She runs into I'm assuming somebody in administration on campus, and she's like, oh, it's the weekend, so none of the teachers are gonna be here. She runs into another teacher, and he's like, oh, could you be Miss Marriott? Is it really you? And he's telling her, I heard everything about your battalion, and how sad that was on the news. And Martha's asking if they know what Mr. Henderson's home address is. And so they give it to her, which in my opinion is a little odd. It's like you're just giving people's addresses out, but this is a different time, so I guess in those days it's not really a big deal. And so she gets his address, and then she proceeds to go to his house. And guys, when I was reading this, my chest was pounding because I was like, this is not gonna end well, and I was just dreading it. And so she's walking and she's really in a hurry. She trips and falls. Somebody helps her to her feet. It happens to be Mr. Henderson, and so he's reaching down to help her up, and she's just completely overwhelmed by the fact that it's him. And she's like, Henry, and he's like, Martha, because he's obviously confused. So they embrace. Martha's crying. She's like, Henry, Henry's also crying. He's like, you made it back. Martha's like, Henry, for the longest time, and she's about to confess to him, and then of course his wife is like, Henry, who are you talking to? And Martha's she just gives this expression as like, what's going on? Mr. Henderson's like, oh, this is just a student of mine. She's back from the war. His wife is like, oh, thank you for your service, Henry, why don't you have her over for dinner? And Martha's like, Henry, who is this? The interesting thing about this entire exchange is that Henry gives this look of I wouldn't say dread, but I think he's fully aware of Martha's feelings for him, and he's watching to see what her reaction is going to be. And so he tells her, he's like, this is my wife. Or Henry goes on to say, we just got married about a month ago. She's like, pardon my manners, I should have introduced myself. I am Lucia. And you get these haunting panels of Martha's world literally flipping upside down. The panel goes upside down. It looks like Martha's falling, and she's hyperventilating. You see all of these flashbacks from their childhood and her performing ballet and the tea time that they had together, and everything is just crashing. And she's saying that this news hurt her more than any wound that she suffered during the war. And I like how Endo drew it. It's glass shattering, and then by the end of the panel you see that Martha's folding into herself, and she's crying, and she's trying to come to terms with all of this that's going on. And she says, with that, this was the end of my adolescence. And so the interesting thing is that we cut to present time, and Becky is just screaming. She's like, no, how could all of this happen? That can't be how it ends. And she's just in a tizzy, and Martha's telling her to get a hold of herself. And Becky's like, why didn't you steal him back? Because she's obsessed with romance dramas, as we all know. Martha's like, that woman is really nice. I mean, her uncle was a distinguished man, apparently. He threw a lot of his own money into the war efforts to rebuild and clean up and do all of these things. They gave her her an opportunity to perform ballet again, which was really cool. Of course, she didn't appreciate being marketed as like the only survivor of the women's battalion, but she loved to dance. Like, that's originally why she went to Eden. So even though she wasn't able to perform as well as she would have before her injuries in the war, she still appreciated the chance to be able to dance again. And it was during that performance that she realized, hey, when one chapter ends, a new chapter opens. And she realized that I still have a life to live, a life that can be fulfilling. And so she was prepared to let that go, to let Henry go. He was clearly happy. He loved his wife. He was a faithful man. And those were the qualities that she fell in love with. Of course, since Becky is a child, she doesn't understand the complexities of these things. She's asking Martha, she's like, if you hadn't gone to the war, then you would have been able to tell Henry how you felt. If these rich people wanted a war, then like, why didn't they go fight for it themselves? Why did they put innocent people in the middle of all this chaos? And Martha's telling her, life is not like that. The world is not that simple. There are things that you will never fully understand. And so they're having this really complex conversation that I'm not really sure somebody as young as Becky will truly understand. But basically Martha is telling her, accepting the fact that you will never understand everything completely is important, because living that way prevents the idea of groupthink, essentially, which is dangerous. And, learning different perspectives and having conversations where ideals don't always match is more important than just going with the flow of things. And so it's interesting because Martha then goes on to tell Becky that, she went to war twice, which is interesting. That's something we didn't know. So she came back, survived it, and then went back again. So I'm curious to see, like, is Endo going to show us Martha go to war again? That would be very interesting. And what was that conflict for? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm very curious to see why it is that Martha went back. And she's telling Becky, like, oh, believe me, he wasn't happy about it too. And Becky's like, who are you talking about? Stop being so vague. Like, tell me who this man is. And Martha's like, again, some things are better left unsaid. Becky sort of tries to piece it together. She's like, wait a minute, was it Mr. Hint? Martha stops her and she's like, again, maybe this is something you don't need to know. And so she leaves and Becky's like, hey, where are you going? And she's like, oh, I have some other errands to run. We flash to a different scene where Martha is holding flowers and she's visiting this huge gravesite. And I'm not sure if this is meant to be like, the fallen soldiers that she fought with, maybe the women in her battalion. Henry is there and he's like, oh, Martha, you're here and you brought flowers. You do that every year. Martha's like, I bring the flowers because, it pleases me to do so. Sometimes, things don't have to change. And she teases Henry and she's like, for example, the fact that you are still a god-awful dancer. And, Henry gets a little flustered by that. He's like, you know what? I'd like to think that I've actually improved in the years since then. One thing about you that hasn't changed is the fact that you're still really cheeky. And so they're having this cute little banter back and forth. They're like, oh, it's really lovely weather today. Mr. Henderson is asking if she would like to join him for some tea later if she has nothing going on. And she's like, sure, that sounds lovely. As long as it's not too bitter, I'd love some. And that's how the chapter ends. I really appreciated this mini arc that Endo Sensei gave us with these characters. I think this entire arc is vitally important considering what Twilight is trying to do with preventing a war between Astania and Westalis. Seeing how war can impact lives so tragically, I think that it gives us as the reader a boost to really support Twilight in his efforts. And like I'm telling you guys, I think if Twilight is ever marked by Martha, I don't think she would be somebody who would be like, what? You're trying to prevent a war? Like, I'm gonna turn you in. It's like, considering like everything that she has been through, I think this makes a great case for Martha being an ally for Lloyd. If he's ever figured out. We don't know. I mean, this is going to be a long series. At some point, there has to be that conflict. But I feel like we definitely made an ally in Martha, if it ever comes to that. So, this was a great arc. Very tragic, but I do like the fact that Henry and Martha are still friends. They're still in each other's lives. There's no tension there. This is how the cards were dealt, and this is who we are now. We might have a few more wrinkles on our face than we want to, but, you know, we're still in each other's lives. And I think that's a really sweet sentiment to leave off on. So, loved this arc. Love the end of the chapter. I like the way everything wrapped up, and I'm looking forward to the next arc. I honestly don't know where we're going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if the next chapter is just a breather chapter, something funny with the Forger family, maybe Anya cutting up and doing something crazy. Thank you guys again for listening, and until next time, remember to be awesome and stay true.